Welcome to Great Automotive Lives. I'm your host, Andrew, the classic car guy. I'm a motoring writer, photographer, and now, inexplicably, in the chilly autumn of my career, a Johnny-come-lately podcaster. This podcast aims to bring to life the stories, histories, intrigue and drama surrounding some of the automotive world's most interesting characters. Some may be well known, others less so, but I hope you will find all, in some small way, warrant you investing a little of your listening time hearing about lives remarkably lived. If nothing else, I hope something you hear today prompts further reading, listening or watching. We are of course privileged, after all, to live in a world today where the ability to drink in fascinating facts and information is limited only by one's thirst for knowledge. No more multi-stop trips on a drafty bus to interrogate the local library's multi-volume Encyclopedia Britannicus or latest Who's Who. No sir, not for us. What a time to be alive. I can offer no firm promises about the frequency or frankly quality of the podcast, but only rather disappointingly vague ones. As to frequency, quite often is my aim, whilst factoring in the surprisingly demanding exercise requirements of two small, relatively aged terriers. In terms of quality, I must defer to the UK shipping forecast and offer you only moderate or good, with subjects quite possibly becoming cyclonic and overall quality almost inevitably falling slowly. All that said, shall we crack on?
Why the Life of Charles Rolls.
The subject of one's inaugural podcast is no trifling matter, but it was nonetheless an easy choice. Charles Rolls may enjoy name recognition, or at least surname recognition, far beyond the hinterland of automotive nerdism, but perhaps less is generally known about the details of this extraordinary automotive life. His background and upbringing were far more emblematic of the uber luxury cars that still bear his name than the fundamentally working class Henry Royce. Perhaps it is Rolls' shockingly premature demise that means he is probably the lesser known of the partnership. After all, Royce outlived him by a full 23 years, despite being his senior by 14. Rolls' life is truly remarkable, probably underexplored, and most certainly more than worthy of some reflection and retrospection in 2025.
The Life of Charles Rolls.
By the time the Honourable Charles Rolls travelled to Bournemouth by train in early July 1910, he was already a celebrated public figure, fated for achievements both in the air and on the road. He most likely would have struck an imposing figure, standing a full 6'5" in height, probably a tad dishevelled, and most likely chain-smoking his way to the south coast. Rolls was heading to the Bournemouth International Aviation Meeting, which constituted part of the town's centenary celebrations. Rolls and another 18 intrepid early aviators were due to convene at an especially chosen 1-mile stretch of grassland on Hengistbury Head, Christchurch, between Tuckton and Double Dykes. The event organisers paid the landowners a generous £2,200 for the use of a tracked and a full pylon course with two surprisingly tight turns at the end was soon laid out. The construction of the infrastructure of the airfield, including its 4 covered grandstands and 15 hangars, progressed efficiently, with the reported total cost of the meeting amounting to a not inconsiderable £22,000. thought to equate to several million of your Great British pounds in today's terms. Of the 19 competitors entered, 15 of them were British or Britain-based and included Rolls as well as Bertram Dixon, Samuel Cody and Claude Graham White. 4 were foreign pilots of some renown: Frenchman Leon Moran, Louis Wagner, Belgium Joris Christians and Swiss Edmund Audemars. A considerable prize fund of £8,000 was made available and was to be awarded across a range of disciplines. For example, a £1,000 prize would go to the winners of both speed and altitude contests. An £800 stipend would be paid to the winner of the overwater race from Hengistbury Head to the Needles Lighthouse at the western end of the Isle of Wight and back again. With no appearance fees on offer, pilots needed to compete and win to make the whole venture pay. Most of the competitors boarded at the Burlington Hotel in Boscombe, although it's not known if Rolls did. Despite his privilege and class, more of which later, he was notoriously parsimonious, so could have easily slept with his plane in its hangar for all we know. Cecil Grace was the first to fly at 6 a.m. on Monday the 11th of July in his short S-27. A cracked cylinder head had been replaced, necessitating an engine test. Grace had not completed his first lap before the engine seized, necessitating an emergency landing. Unlucky for him, his landing path crossed a sunken road that had been filled with loose sand. This immediately arrested the short's undercarriage and the resulting stresses wrecked the aircraft. Grace was unhurt and no doubt reflected on the old adage that any landing that you walk away from is, by definition and comparison, indeed a good landing. Charles Rolls has a more successful first morning, returning unscathed and with a complete aircraft following a 4-lap test flight. This must have reassured Rolls considerably, as he'd commissioned some modifications to his French-built Wright Flyer and had been keen to test them. In an attempt to improve the craft's notoriously mercurial handling, the fixed horizontal rear stabilizer had been replaced with a movable elevator, which was coupled to the front elevator. This arrangement had been designed by Count Charles de Lambert and built by the Wright factory in France. It was a modification, however, which did not carry the tacit approval of the Wright brothers. At around 11:45, Rolls took off for the first of his competition flights. He climbed to attain an official altitude of 971 feet before spiralling down to land after a flight of around 30 minutes. Before landing, he made an attempt at the slowest lap contest. With the throttle almost closed and the nose of the flyer pointing skyward, he achieved a 4-minute 13-second lap, which corresponds to an average speed of around 25.5 miles an hour. With all seeming well with the modifications, Rolls was up again at around 5 p.m. for an attempt at the altitude prize. He abandoned his attempt at around 900 feet, as his craft seemed not to be reacting predictably to his inputs. During his descent, however, the issue seemed to correct itself, and once on the ground, no faults or issues were detected. Before the day's activities drew to a close, Rolls took a tilt at the 5-lap speed contest, posting a time of 14 minutes 39.4 seconds. On the inaugural day of the competition, it was only Rolls' slowest lap attempt that proved anywhere near competitive. Tuesday the 12th of July marked the first day of the precision landing competition. It was a bright summer's morning, but a 15 to 20 mile an hour wind was gusting across the course towards the grandstands, making the challenge of the event all the more taxing. The aviators had to cross the start-finish line before landing within a painted circle with a 100-yard diameter. The circle contained a solid painted centre spot. and the winner would be the pilot who landed closest to it. Rolls was the third aviator to attempt the feat after Graham White and Audemars. Rolls turned left after the first pylon and then flew a low S-turn across the wind to land with the wind from behind and to his right. He overshot the target by around 24 yards. For his second attempt, just before 1 p.m, Rolls amended his strategy accordingly. This time he flew far outside the perimeter of the airfield and approached the target circle directly into the wind, scudding in from behind the grandstands. After clearing these not insignificant obstacles, he descended sharply and crossed the perimeter fence only at around 40 feet. Suddenly realizing that he could only substantially undershoot from that altitude and attitude, Rolls pulled sharply back on the elevator controls. Nearby spectators reported hearing a sharp crack as the aerodynamic forces suddenly overcame the structural integrity of the fragile struts supporting the retrofitted rear elevator assembly. The structural failure caused the right flyer to nose down dramatically, hitting the ground almost vertically. The craft flipped over onto its back and Rolls was thrown from his seat, finally landing on the inverted top wing. From the grandstands, Rolls didn't look badly injured. It soon became evident, however, that Hendre Head had become the scene of a national tragedy as policemen and officials formed a protective ring around the accident site. Rolls had succumbed to a violent concussion and would not leave the wreckage of his rudimentary flying machine alive. The Honourable Charles Rolls was less than 2 months shy of his 33rd birthday. Upon his untimely death, he attained the dubious distinction of being the first British subject of a heavier-than-air flight death. Only 10 others internationally are thought to precede Rolls in this ghoulish roll call. The Honourable Charles Stuart Rolls was born on the 27th of August 1877 in Hill Street, nearby to Berkeley Square in Mayfair. A swanky part of town today, and probably even more so in 1877. He was the fourth and youngest child of John Rolls, 1st Baron Langattock, and Georgiana Rolls, Baroness Langattock of Monmouthshire. Father John was a soldier, landowner, Conservative Member of Parliament, socialite and agriculturalist. Georgiana was the daughter of the 9th Baronet of Monmouth and hence no stranger to a privileged lifestyle. John and Georgiana's ancestral pile was the Hendre in Monmouthshire, situated in the borderlands between England and Wales. The Hendre was a sprawling country estate and the only full-scale Victorian Gothic pile to exist in the county of Monmouthshire. The house is often described thus: a striking Victorian country house, the eclecticism of its architecture reflecting its complex history. It was between here and their impressive Mayfair townhouse that the Rollses would raise their 4 children, John, Henry, Eleanor, and young Charles. With the family controlling extensive property holdings in London, especially around the Old Kent Road, where it could be said they enjoyed a monopoly that was supposedly yielding around £46,000 a year in rent at the time of Charles's birth, his was not a childhood blighted by impecunity. Despite these capital city-based interests, John and Georgiana were most at home amongst the natural beauty of Monmouthshire. As such, young Charles would have spent much time here and was known to have rigged up an electrical bell system linking his rooms with some of the sprawling estate's numerous outbuildings. The exact reason for this remains unclear, but points to Charles's early fascination with the electrical and the mechanical, and probably the electromechanical. Charles's educational trajectory was initially conventional for the son of a baron. taking in first Eton and then Cambridge University. By around the time of his going up to Cambridge in 1895, Charles had become one of a mere handful of British autocar owners. He travelled to Paris in person to buy and collect a Peugeot Phaeton, paying over £200 for the privilege, and driving the Gallic conveyance all the way back to Cambridge. Rolls's Peugeot was thought to be the first car based in Cambridge, and on his frequent returns to the Hendre, it became one of just 3 owned in the whole of Wales. Also, in 1895, he became a founding member of the Automobile Club of Great Britain, which successfully campaigned against the standing 4-mile-an-hour speed limit imposed by the Locomotive Act of 1865, raising it first to 14 miles an hour in 1896 and eventually on to 20 miles per hour and beyond. Privileged and wealthy he may have been, but Charles wasn't averse to rolling, no pun intended, up a well-tailored sleeve and getting stuck in with the spanners. In fact, his choice of studies at Trinity College and hands-on approach earned him the nickname of Dirty Rolls, and on occasion the eminently preferable Petrolls. This passion for his calling no doubt aided his studies, as Rolls graduated in January 1898 with a Class II Ordinary Bachelor of Arts degree by special examination in Mechanical and Applied Science. From Cambridge he was accepted as a student member of the Institution of Civil Engineers in February 1898, later earning a Master of Arts from this most august of organisations. It was during this time that Charles earned a reputation for being terribly careful with money, a first out of the taxi and the last to the bar type of situation, economical with food, and exhibiting a very modest interest in alcohol. Even before Rolls concluded his studies, it's fair to say that he packed a fair bit into what remained of his foreshortened life. During this post-1898 period, he ignited his passion for aviation, like a lifelong pyromaniac undertaking a temp-to-perm contract in a fireworks factory. His list of aviation derring-do, firsts and astounding feats could inform a lengthy iteration of a Parallel Universe's Great Aviation Lives podcast. For the purposes of the here and now, however, I will try to focus on his automotive exploits, given the humble remit of this podcast. Hopefully the aviation-loving listener will have had their thirst at least partially slaked by our sombre opening paragraphs. In 1897, Rolls progressed from his fairly pedestrian 3 3/4 horsepower Peugeot. His trips from London to Cambridge were taking him around 12 hours at an average of a slothful 4 miles per hour, to a significantly faster 8 horsepower Panhard and Levasseur. By 1899 he was racing the Panhard, and in his first race, the 1899 Paris to Boulogne, he finished 4th in the tourist class at an average of an impressive 27 miles per hour. Despite his encouragingly impressive performance, Rolls was left feeling he had a lot to learn, and, of course, that he needed a newer, faster 12 horsepower Panhard. And so Charles sold his 8 horsepower Panhard, nicknamed the Fire Engine, for £1,280 and set off once again to Paris to purchase a new 12 horsepower version. He already had his eye on a race to be held in 1900, a 1,000-mile reliability trial being organised by the Automobile Club of Great Britain and Ireland. Promoted by Lord Northcliffe and organised by his then-partner Claude Johnson, the event was primarily aimed at promoting understanding and acceptance of this newfangled mode of transport amongst the wider populace of the country. Johnson travelled extensively around the country, mapping the route and setting up the significant infrastructure required to shelter, feed and water the hundreds of automobilists and autocarists and mechanicians, as they were so called. This organisational effort was a huge feat for the times, and Johnson tackled it with aplomb. Those participating in the 1,000-mile trial were required to complete a record sheet along the route so that their participation was recorded and average speeds could be worked out. The entry list is a veritable roll call of early motoring luminaries. The Honourable J. Scott Montague MP, the Honourable C.S. Rolls, of course, Mr. Mark Mayhew, Mr. Frank Hedges Butler, Claude Johnson himself, J.D. Sidley, Herbert Austin, and so on. The recorded winner of the event was none other than our man, the Honourable C.S. Rolls, who attained an average speed of 17.7 miles an hour at the wheel of his 12-horsepower Panhard. Partly to help fund his racing exploits, Rolls established one of the country's first car dealerships in 1903. With a fiscal injection of £6,000 from his father, Charles established C.S. Rolls & Co., with offices and showrooms located in Brook Street, Mayfair, and selling fine Peugeot and Minerva motor cars to the well-heeled of the nation. Rolls essentially assumed the role of publicist and marketing man for the dealership, whilst one Claude Goodman Johnson, remember him, was engaged to organise and manage machinations of the business. Johnson would go on to prove to be a kingpin in the development of the Rolls-Royce marque, despite his later self-imposed and self-deprecating nickname of the hyphen between Rolls and Royce. If you imagined that Rolls' newfound business responsibilities bound him to a leather-top desk in Brook Street, W1, then you would be deluding yourself. In 1903, he set an unofficial land speed record of nearly 83 miles per hour in his imposing Moors motor car at the Duke of Portland's Clipstone Park estate in Dublin. Much to Rolls' chagrin, however, the governing body refused to acknowledge his accomplishment because the timing equipment used was not appropriately approved. Whilst Rolls was busy worshipping feverishly at the altar of speed and competition, Claude the hyphen Johnson was casting around looking for new and interesting cars to market to Rolls' extensive society network. This search would precipitate a fortuitous meeting in May 1904, for it was during that month that Rolls travelled north to meet one Henry Royce at the Midland Hotel in Manchester. Royce was essentially a self-taught electrical engineer, having previously been involved in the design, manufacture and sale of magnetos and electric cranes. His modest upbringing saw him take on a job as a newspaper and telegram delivery boy when his father prematurely died in 1872, when poor Royce was just 9. Despite their backgrounds being poles apart, Rolls and Royce shared a common passion for cars. Taking inspiration from Laverne Gerard's tome, The Automobile, Its Construction and Management, Royce purchased a 10-horsepower Decauville from France and set about dismantling, improving, refining and rebuilding it. He redesigned the bearings, radiator, carburation, transmission, reduced the weight and even built his own twin-cylinder engine to power it. By 1904, Royce was lending his 10 horsepower out to potential customers, one of whom alerted Claude Johnson of its innate charms and significant potential. Despite all that set them apart, Rolls and Royce enjoyed immediate chemistry, especially once Rolls took the helm of the Royce 10 horsepower. That very day, Rolls committed to sell every car that Royce could build, and the couple resolved to form a company to that very end. On the 23rd of December 1904, a formal agreement was signed. the same month that the Rolls-Royce 10 horsepower debuted at the Paris Salon. On the 15th of March 1906, Rolls-Royce Limited, with a capital of 60,000 Great British pounds, was registered, with the new company buying out C.S. Rolls & Co. in 1907. Although Rolls was given the title of Technical Managing Director with an accompanying £750 annual salary and a 4% profit share, he was very much the firm's promotional guru. Ironically, it was this promotional bent that would plant the seeds of Rolls' departure from an active role in the business, and even in his own premature death. In 1906, Rolls travelled to the USA to exhibit a new Rolls-Royce at the New York Motor Show. During his time there, he was invited to an exhibition organised by the Aero Club of America. Whilst there, he was introduced to the Wright brothers by Patrick Alexander, who was a senior member of the Aero Club. Up until that point, Rolls had been an accomplished hot air balloon pilot with over 170 ascents, and hence presumably descents, to his name. However, his exposure to the world of heavier-than-air flight, as pioneered by his new friends Orville and Wilbur, proved transformational for Rolls. In October 1908, Charles Rolls travelled to Camp d'Avour in France to participate in his first aeroplane flight, with Wilbur Wright himself wrestling at the rudimentary controls. When the Wright brothers came to Britain in May 1909 to discuss the building of their flying machines, Rolls accompanied them and their sister Catherine throughout their 3-day stay. He even drove old Orville Wright to the Aero Club at Laysdown on the Isle of Sheppey in a Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. By this point it had become clear that Rolls had become a little bored with his motoring interests in favour of the brave, exciting and dangerous new world of powered, heavier-than-air flight. By the end of 1909, Rolls resigned from his active position at Rolls-Royce to become a non-executive director only. With his time now freed up to focus on his new passion, Rolls purchased a Wright Flyer at about this time. It was this flying machine in slightly modified form that would end Rolls's life on the 12th of July 1910 at a blustery Hengistbury Head. The grave of Charles Rolls is in the churchyard of Llangatock, Vibon, Avel, and topped by a Celtic cross it bears the inscription, "In memory of Charles Stuart Rolls, 3rd son of 1st Baron Llangatock, born 27th of August 1877, died July 12th, 1910. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Charles's father John was grief-stricken at the loss of his beloved youngest child. John, Lord Llangatock's death in September 1912 was in many ways a blessing in disguise. Unlike his wife Georgiana, he was spared the pain of witnessing the premature death of his remaining 2 sons. Upon his death he was succeeded by his eldest son, John Rolls, 2nd Baron Llangatock, who was to die of wounds received at the Battle of the Somme in 1916. His remaining son Hendre had died a mere 4 months before, the 2nd Baron, of sudden and unexpected heart failure. Only Charles's sister Eleanor was to live a long and full life and become the only of the Rolls children to outlive their mother. With the male line all dead and no grandchildren born to carry the line forward, the title of Baron of Llangatock became extinct upon the demise of John, the 2nd Baron, in 1916.
Summing up Charles Rolls.
So what can we make of young Charles Rolls then? The overall impression he leaves with me is one of feverish activity and achievement. In his short life, he covered enough ground to fill 3 or 4 more conventional and conventionally longer lifetimes. It's worth remembering at this juncture that the ramblings presented here are significantly condensed, with little mention made, intentionally I might add, of most of his aviation-based achievements. It's fair to say that his achievements in the air probably significantly outnumbered those made on terra firma too. Given all this, I don't think anyone could legitimately accuse Charles Rolls of letting the grass, or any other type of flora, grow under those unusually large and expensively brogued feet. Certainly any portrayals as Rolls as some sort of foppish Edwardian dandy or louche lascivious dilettante can most certainly be given shrift of the very shortest variety. Yes, he was privileged, well connected, and probably doted upon, but unlike so many blessed with similar benefits, he used them constructively, actively and astutely. His most oft-reported traits seem to be a slight lack of sartorial direction for a man of his means, a thriftiness that bordered on stinginess at times, and a moderate addiction to tobacco. By all accounts, he was no sort of a drinker, and history remains annoyingly stum about his sexual proclivities or his gambling habits. So let's assume they were normal, or at least inoffensive. Given his short involvement in the Rolls-Royce partnership, which amounted to just 5 years of activity in essence, there are others who can lay claim to having had more impact on the mark. Henry Royce and Claude Johnson are the most obvious candidates, of course, but there are others. However, it seems to me that Rolls's privileged and rarefied connections, combined with his unceasing enthusiasm and support for the mark, set its trajectory towards greatness from the get-go. A bit like a ship's captain setting in a course and leaving others to execute it safely and effectively. Whatever your standpoint, there can surely be few other 32-year-olds that prematurely perished over 100 years ago whose legacy can be so readily and undilutedly recognised and appreciated today.
In the footsteps of Charles Rolls.
It's sometimes nice for the eager autophile to find an excuse for a road trip or two, and what better way to stretch the legs of your silver cloud, shadow, spirit, ghost, or in my case, 1984 Renault 11 GTL, than to walk in the metaphorical footsteps of the great man. If you agree, here are some ways in which you can experience and enjoy the earthly remnants of this great automotive life. Of course, the Rolls family's Welsh Gothic mansion still exists should a visit grab your fancy. Today the Hendre is fully transmogrified into the Rolls of Monmouth Golf Club. It's a nice tribute to the family that their name takes such a prominent place in the title of said club. Another benefit of its current status is that you can grab a bite to eat there, and if you're a golfist and have a bunch of those sticks with you, you can even enjoy a frame or two of golf. In the name of complete transparency, I myself am not a golfist. Of course, if you're in the vicinity of the Hendre, which is specifically 4 miles west of Monmouth on the B4233 to Abergavenny, then you should visit Rolls's final resting place. The church of St Cadoc's of Langattock Vibonavelle is around a mile south from the Hendre, and is described by the Friends of Friendless Churches, the group that maintains it, as a secluded medieval church linked to Rolls-Royce. In this peaceful bucolic graveyard stands a gravestone rising more prominently than those around it. Here lies Charles Rolls. Inside the church there is another memorial to Charles in the chancel. This is in the form of an extravagantly engraved brass plaque dedicated to all 3 Rolls brothers. If you find yourself at either the church or the golf club, it would seem churlish not to journey a few miles into Monmouth itself. Probably the most famous memorial to Charles Rolls stands in front of the Shire Hall in Agincourt Square. The 8-foot-high bronze statue was designed by Sir William Goscombe John. Sir Aston Webb, R.A., designed the pink granite plinth upon which Rolls stands. Now a Grade 2 listed structure, this depiction sees Rolls inspecting a purposely incomplete model of his biplane. The tail is missing in reference to the accepted cause of the accident which kills Rolls. A thoughtful dedication reads, "Erected by public subscription to the memory of the Honourable Charles Stuart Rolls, third son of the Lord and Lady Langattock, as a tribute of admiration for his great achievements in motoring, ballooning and aviation. He was a pioneer in both scientific and practical motoring and aviation, and the first to fly across the Channel from England to France and back without landing. He lost his life by the wrecking of his aeroplane at Bournemouth, July 12, 1910. His death caused worldwide regret and deep national sorrow." Another significant Rolls-linked venue that is easy and possibly even fun to visit, of course, is the Midland Hotel in Manchester. The site of that fateful meeting between Rolls and Royce, the Midland has been a Manchester landmark since 1903 and remains a well-respected hotel and spa to this very day. Other opportunities to commemorate Rolls present themselves in other parts of the country too. The site of the 1910 air show on Hengistbury Head, where Rolls' plane crashed, has been extensively developed now, but the sad event is marked in two ways. St Peter's School Sports Ground has a memorial plaque unveiled in 1981, and a nearby road is named Rolls Drive in tribute. In March 2010, an English Heritage blue plaque in honour of Charles Rolls was unveiled at 14 to 15 Conduit Street, Mayfair, W1. This marks the location of Rolls-Royce's offices and showrooms from 1905, and a place where Charles Rolls could often be found demonstrating the company's creations to prospective customers. Lastly, if you find yourself early for your ferry to France, then do stop by the statue of Charles Rolls on Dover's Marine Parade. This statue was erected in 1912 to commemorate Rolls' non-stop crossing of the Channel and safe return without landing. It has Rolls in pensive pose and dressed in full aviation garb as appropriate to the times. In the accompanying show notes you might find links to these Rolls-related tributes to assist your road trip planning. I truly hope you found today's Great Automotive Life interesting, inspiring, or at the very least a useful jumping off point for your own onward journey of discovery. Much like an underinvested and dysfunctional mass transportation system, I'm reasonably likely to amble along again at some undefined point in the near, medium or far future to invite you to join me on another automotive tangent of discovery. Inevitably, and for the sake of brevity, the fascinating details of this great automotive life have been significantly distilled, and so preemptive apologies are offered for glaring omissions, of which there are probably many. Your input and feedback is welcome, of course, on the understanding that I'm pathetically thin-skinned, so go easy with me. A contact email address is trepidatiously provided in the accompanying show notes. Until then, please tell many others if you enjoyed this podcast, and even perhaps leave the 21st century's equivalent of a thumbs up at the Colosseum in the form of a warm and fluffy review. It not only helps me avoid becoming moodier and more irascible, but also helps others find the podcast and generally makes the world a tiny bit nicer for a vanishingly small number of people. If you hated it, tell no one. Until next time, dear listener,